Hey, Dr. Von Duke here. I want to talk to you a little bit about writing up the drafts for task 3 and submitting the drafts for task 3, the commentary for, and all the pieces for draft 3. So let me talk first about the writing part. So you've already filled out the draft form so that you've collected your evidence. And the reason why I say to draft a chart first and then write second is so that you make sure that you're focusing on the evidence that the question is asking for, and not sort of writing at the question, hoping that eventually you'll get to the point where you'll have achieved something that the reviewer is looking for, which I often see as a reviewer. So you're going to start with the narrative, taking a row at a time. And I'm going to ask you not to write longer than you need to also. So write enough to answer the question, but don't write extra. That's not a benefit to just sort of glut your commentary with verbiage. And also you have a page limit. And then make sure that you organize your materials with coordinated headings. So if you are referring to say your lesson objective 1, the student work should be labeled as it's uploaded as lesson 1 and assessment lesson 1 and so forth. So we'll talk about that in a minute too. So basically you're going to turn column headings into sentence starters, and then you're going to write across the rows and in the paragraph. So let me show you what that would look like here. So we'll stay on this page for a minute. If you look at the draft documents that I've provided. So little by little, as I've been making these draft documents and thinking about how to make this most effective for you to get at your work quickly, is I started putting the column headings almost as sentence starters. So my student's learning need is blank and the evidence for it is blank. So that would be for rubric 15 based on the analysis that you did for the first question on this rubric, or on the task 3 commentary. The specific next steps to meet this need is, so it's really one need at a time that you're going to discuss. And then once you have each need and the steps discussed, you're going to potentially change that listing into a logical order. And then you're going to say the research that relates this step to this need, whatever they are, it is such and such. And the author suggests that you should do what have you. So, so you can see here that if we were talking about 3 different needs here, say 1 associated with each learning objective, you would use this as the sentence starter, take the information from here, go to this column, and then go to this column, and that would be your paragraph. And then you could start a new paragraph with the next need and so forth. Now, you may or may not choose to paragraph that often. My suggestion is, since this is dense, heavy copy, the more paragraphing you do, it's going to take up a little bit more space, but it's going to make things easier and clear for the reviewer. Whenever you make things nicer to the reviewer will be nicer to you. Now, the next part of this advice video is submitting task 3, what you need to submit. So I'm going to talk through that a little bit. Now, that information is available. Here is the Spec Ed handbook, right? So if you go to the Spec Ed handbook, and we're looking at task 3 directions. So let me just move this down a minute. You're going to be submitting the artifacts for task 3 begins on page 49 of the Spec Ed handbook, but there's a lot of dense information there. I've sort of simplified it to the main things that you need to know. So if you have some work done in Braille or a foreign language, then you need to go and look at that a little bit more deeply. But in general, the short list is this. Because you need to cite baseline data, daily assessment records, and student work samples to provide evidence for your analysis, it's going to show how your supports helped or failed to help your student, then you're going to need to submit these documents. So let's just take a minute and look back at that question. Remember back in the assessment commentary, the first question asks you to identify the lesson objectives for each daily assessment record, describe any changes in your assessment. Remember, you weren't going to worry about that. Provide either a written work sample or a video. and when you also provide a timestamp and ID who the focused learner is. So then you're going to show how they made progress, right? So you'll state the lesson objective. You'll say how they made progress towards the lesson objective. You'll analyze their strengths or needs across the work that they did and your plan support. And then you'll do that for each objectives. And then based on that above, you'll talk about the impact of your support. So we went through this with rubric 11. So the impact of your support and the connection between your support and the evidence of the student's performance. So you can see from that first difficult question in task 3 that you're going to have to post the work sample in order to reference it and use it as evidence. So you're going to have the work sample, that is your part A submission when you get to the TPA website. It's not required, but obviously you need it for evidence. So if it's written work, there's no limit to the written work that you can submit. If you submit an audio or video file, it has to be under 2 minutes. Or you can reference 2 minutes of the video that you've already submitted for task 2. And you should transcribe anything that's not clear. I would suggest that you transcribe everything that you're going to reference, especially if it's from task 2, because you need to understand that the reviewer cannot go back and look at your video. So if you can transcribe the portion that you're talking about, then they'll be able to see the evidence that they need. The part B assessment is the baseline assessment plus the lesson assessments written. So it says there's no page limit, but there is a limit to how many pages each assessment can be. So you're going to put your baseline assessment filled in by your student and the lesson assessment that you might have given for each lesson objective or for all the entire unit. And then each of those assessments gets to be at least 5 pages or under. We talked before about how the evidence for feedback, this was question 12 and 13. The most ideal evidence for feedback is to have a video conference where you explain your written or oral feedback to your student. That will cover both 12 and rubric 13. Your video file has to be under 3 minutes, or it can be an audio file under 3 minutes. That would be fine too. If you use written pages, student pages, where you provide feedback, there's no limit to the pages there. The problem with just using written pages though is how will you ensure that your student understands that feedback? How will you provide evidence that your student will understand that feedback? That's difficult to show with just a written page. You can transcribe, good idea, the audio or video conference, but that can't be more than 2 pages. And then we talked about the, for rubric 14 or question 3 on this. So here, evidence of use of expressive receptive communication skills. So this work here, you can put 5 minutes of a new video file there, up to 5 minutes. You may reference some written work. Each of these should be clearly labeled. So communication example, written work, communication example, video file. And there you want to show the student using the communication skill with your support. That way you're getting a level 3 and a level 4. Then the part D that you would submit under the EdTPA portfolio site where you submit your work is this assessment commentary itself. And this assessment commentary itself should be no more than 8 pages, and you cannot, do not delete the prompts. You have to keep the prompts in there. So 8 pages is pretty good, but you know, clearly that's where I say you don't want to have a lot of extra verbiage in there that isn't serving the purpose of getting to the evidence that the reviewer is going to be looking for, because you don't want to run out of pages. All right, so as always, if you get stuck, inbox me at edtpafb@gmail.com, and I can look over one of your tasks, provide a mock score and a Zoom meeting. The music is either by Bruce Anthony and Sam Nobles, or I sometimes use the non-copyrighted music from the Strive Studies YouTube channel, which I love because you just watch her study for 4 hours and drink water and take breaks, and it paces you. It's a good idea for you while you're going through this exhausting process. All docs are linked below, and good luck. Let me know how it goes.